Larry, I want to say hello and to our neighbors, Boo's Who, and to my sister, Aloha. I titled my presentation A Chronology of the Old Gunflint Trail Post Office, and I'll try to present things in order in which they occurred. The story of how I got started goes back about 8 years ago to 2013. My dad was still alive and he owned the building. He owned this property, and it was fall, and my sisters kept pecking at me, "What are you getting our father for Christmas?" I didn't know what to get him. One day while bouncing around on eBay and different things, Amazon, I saw an envelope on eBay that said Gunflint. So I bought it. Or I should say I bid and won the bid. And then I saw another one that said Gunflint Trail, and I bought it. And then when I received them and talked with Dad, we had no idea that actually the post office had two names. So in 2013 is when the story for me started. And hopefully what I can do today is go from those two used envelopes that I gave my dad for Christmas to the present. I want to stop for a minute and thank Richard Fink for asking me to do this and persisting and saying, "Larry, you can do this. You've got a good story to tell." And I want to thank David Coleman for helping with the basis of getting my talk on the screen for everyone. And I want to thank the Gunflint Trail Historical Society for also inviting me. I hope I can tell you the who, what, where, when, how, or how much, or why not of the post office for the Gunflint Trail. David, next slide, please. Here's a copy of some of my early research. I found this in the Cook County Historical Society's documents. It's an application to locate a post office. And you'll notice about a third of the way down, it says office and state. It was Gunflint, Minnesota. This was July 18th of 1949. This is the earliest record I can find for the Gunflint post office. About 3/4 of the way down, you see that it was a star route, which meant that the post office would not be responsible for delivery or pickup. That was done by Don Brazel. But I think the most amazing thing of all my research is when you get down about an inch from the bottom and you see the signature of Justine Kerfoot. Justine applied to have a post office in Minnesota on the Gunflint Trail. And I suspect that's why it was named Gunflint, Minnesota. Next slide, please. Well, this is from the Cook County News Herald in April of 13. And it says that John Blatnick, our congressional member from this district, recommended George Stapleton to be the acting postmaster for a new post office on Stapleton's Place, north of Poplar Lake. It said he would be a acting postmaster until a competitive exam was held, which wasn't done for several years. A rural post office was a big thing back then. A lot of it was done as jobs for veterans. A lot of it was done as publicity for the neighborhood. I'm not sure, but I'm thinking that when Justine applied, that this was advertising for the neighborhood, maybe the business and the community. Next slide. Here's a picture slide, and in the vernacular of collectors, they're called real photo postcards of Voyagers Inn. This is our house where I live now, where this message is coming from. It has two doors. The left one went into the living quarters. The right one went into the store. This is the only picture postcard I have ever found about our business, Voyagers Inn. If you see the arrow there, there's a little black post office box between the two doors where you could deposit mail. This is in 1950. Soon to be the post office. The right-hand side, Voyagers Inn served coffee, breakfast, soup, sandwich, souvenirs, and the post office would be one small part of Stapleton's endeavors here. I'm not very familiar with that car, but it looks like about a 49 or 50 Chevy. Next slide, please. Now, this is a piece that I got from the Minneapolis Star, Tuesday, May 16th of 1950. Someone up on Gunflint had a copy. This one came from the Cook County Cook County Historical Society. And it said official ceremonies marking the opening of a 4th class post office in Voyagers Inn. A 4th class is the smallest with the least revenue, least pay. And it says Stapleton on Pope Lake. At that time, I looked on the map, and East and West Pope were not designated differently. They were just Pope Lake. He said there was a brisk sale. He was secretary of the Lake Superior North Shore Association and claims the building of the first modern resort, Loon Lake Lodge, in 1938. I thought Loon Lake Lodge was a little bit earlier, but the next paragraph says that the post office would serve 75 year-round residents and about 400 regular summer dwellers and thousands of tourists. Now, the funny part. Tonight, this is May 16th, trappers, guides, old settlers, U.S. and Canadian rangers will converge on the inn for a wilderness country dance. I have no knowledge whether that took place. It'd be a real hoot to see if anybody had a photograph from then. Next slide, please. Here's where I began my collection. This is one of the pieces of mail that I gave my dad as his Christmas present. It's simply an envelope addressed to a person in Florida, W.D. Patton in Mount Dora, but it was postmarked very clearly, Gunflint, Minnesota, May 16th, a.m., 1950. This is the first morning of the first day it was a post office here. I looked up W.D. Patton. He was the mayor of Mount Dora. Next slide, please. This article came from the Cook County newspaper. It actually came off of microfilm there, so the little lines are scratches in the film. The first stamps were licked. The first letters began dropping through the letter slot. And Gunflint, Minnesota, soon to be Gunflint Trail, is the new postmaster. This was the first public notice of it. It's expected the post office will hold special interest for postmark collectors because of its wilderness appeal, and this will help to swell the cancellations. Next slide, please. In fact, it did swell. This one is where they changed the name. This came from the Postal Bulletin, June of 1950, and the name was officially changed to Gunflint Trail. Yet the picture I showed you a little bit earlier of Stapleton putting up the sign, he knew the sign. He knew when the post office opened that they would have a new name. It took about 8 or 10 weeks to get a new rubber stamp. The government moved slow, even in 1950. Next slide, please. This is the local notice that came in the Cook County News Herald. The name will be changed on August 1st. The post office has been chosen to serve the upper end of the trail. And at the bottom, it says an order has been issued to change the name effective August 1st. You're hereby requested to give the matter the widest publicity possible without expense to the department. So do whatever you can to publicize it, but don't spend any money. So the newspaper was it. Next, please. Here's another one of the postcards, not one that I gave my father, but it's also from Mount Dora and from W.D. Patton. July 31st p.m., last day, last afternoon that we would ever see the cancellation, Gunflint, Minnesota. Envelopes at that time required 3 cents, postcards 1 cent. Next. This is a rather unusual piece of mail that I found. On the front, it has been canceled twice. The last day of Gunflint and the first day of Gunflint Trail. Well, postal mail is not supposed to have 2 cancellations. And the only way they could do that is by putting on an extra stamp. A half penny was the smallest we could have. On the back of the envelope, it was signed Postmaster George W. Stapleton, acting postmaster. I believe this is the only copy of his signature that I have found in postal history or in all the documents we have, other than the deed and things like that. Next, please. Here's the second piece I bought, Dad. It's the first day that it was called Gunflint Trail. Again, Mount Dora Mayor W.D. Patton has this one. What the collectors would do is they would send an envelope to the postmaster, pre-addressed, pre-stamped, and say, please cancel this on the first day and mail it to me. Some had embellishments, some had instructions, but that was the essence of it. Next, please. Here's an important one that came in the Postal Bulletin, August of 1950. Gunflint, Minnesota was advanced to the 3rd class based on revenue. They collected enough money that they said, we're going to make you a 3rd class post office. That does 2 things. It gives them more money, but it also gives them a higher pay. Now let's go to the next one. This is one of my favorite postcards. This is the front is at the bottom. It's an aerial view of Loon Lake Lodge. And the top is part of the backside where the message is. What really caught my eye wasn't that it was Gunflint Trail, Minnesota. This is 1952. This is 2 years later. But look at the date. August is upside down. Now, here's my question for me. Was George Stapleton so lackadaisical that for 23 days of August, he had that upside down? I didn't know how to answer it, so I sent mail to a lot of my postcard and stamp collector sources and said, could you find me a Gunflint Trail cancellation from August of 52 before the 23rd? Now, that's a pretty specific order. Find me a 70-year-old envelope or postcard from a little place on the Gunflint Trail in the month of August, and lo and behold, they did. Before you leave this slide, look at the word Gunflint Trail at the top. It covers almost 180 degrees of the stamp. Next slide, David. Here's what I got. Some collector had a Gunflint Lodge envelope from August 5th, 2.5 weeks earlier. August 5th, afternoon, 52, Gunflint Trail, and August is right side up. I thought I had solved the problem. didn't know it wasn't that way all month. My friend Chuck Smasny on West Pope, who's a stamp collector, looked at this and said, Larry, you haven't solved the problem. Look at the Gunflint Trail. It's only about 120 degrees. There are 2 rubber stamps in use. And so the question still stands. I'm still looking for a piece of mail before August 23rd of 52 to see if it's been canceled with the other stamp and that the date is upright. I just thought this was a little humor, a little interesting. Next slide, please. Well, we've gone through 49, 50, 51, and 52. This is a slide I took from my father's collection of thousands of slides. The box was one of those yellow Kodachrome slide boxes, and on it it said, before we bought fall 52. Now the car in there is a 1953 Buick Roadmaster Riviera. I don't know if my dad ever had that car, so it might be Stapleton's, it might be my dad's. I noticed when I was going through this with David, there is no mailbox on the house. There is a sign that says, I think, store and lunch room, or store and lunch something. Then I thought about being a kid. I was 5 years old or 6 years old then. There was a mailbox out by the road. And perhaps that's why there isn't one on the house. This is either the fall of 52 or spring of 53. The birch have no leaves. The sand looks, the soil in the yard looks pretty dry. So it could be August, September, October. If you look at this, and if you ever drive by, the only thing is the roof looks a little redder and the house looks a little browner. Next slide, please. Well, since we were buying the building, Dad bought the house in 52, taking possession in 53. He said, I'm not going to be a postmaster. I'm only going to be here a couple weeks a year. So Al Hedstrom was named as acting postmaster, and the post office would be at End of the Trail Lodge on Sag, and it would be done on April 10th. Now, the interesting thing, I think, is the last paragraph. It says, this change will mean that practically all the resort addresses on the trail will be Grand Marais. My question to the members and anyone is, was the address prior to that Gunflint Trail, Minnesota, instead of Grand Marais? And next slide, please. Here's a postcard I found of the trading post at End of the Trail Lodge. A flagpole, and thank you, it's Flag Day. A little sign on the tree says office. There's a covered picnic table. When Cheryl Hedstrom gave her presentation, she said they often hung around under that covered picnic, around the covered picnic table. I think that this is where the mail would have been canceled, in the office, not in their home or not in the dining room. So that's why I've included this. So this, I will say simply, this is probably where the post office stamp was located. Next slide, please. Now, this moved on April from End of the Trail, from our house to End of the Trail. And this is an important notice from the postal bulletin. All the postal bulletins were sent out weekly. They were kind of like our newsletter we get monthly. They were 4 columns on a page, fine print. And this is just one little bit of it. A discontinued 4th class Minnesota post office, and it was Route 41325. That was Gunflint Trail. And it said effective the 31st of 53 of October, the mail would go to Grand Marais and the post office would cease. It had been third class. Remember, this is when the volume of mail decreased and it was reduced back to a fourth class post office, and the salary was less. Next page, please. Here's a piece of mail that was last day. And as I said earlier, some people put embellishments on it. I just thought this was amazing that this said General Store, Post Office, closed, last day of post office. Still a 3-cent stamp, Gunflint Trail, Minnesota, October 31st, 53 p.m., signed by Al Hedstrom. And this is the last day, the last afternoon, Halloween of 53. Next page. This is one other that I had that Al, as a courtesy, would have written his name, acting postmaster, A.L. Hedstrom, and on the back, Gunflint Trail, Minnesota. These last two were simply, this is it. This was the end of the post office. Next. Here's a kind of a summary I made. A lot of people asked and were interested, how much money was collected? Well, on the left side are the revenues that were reported, or receipts that were reported. Now, these are calendar years. 1,550, the first year, was projected, so it may not be accurate. The next three are accurate numbers, and the most they ever collected was $1,659. That doesn't sound like a lot to you. Think all they sold were 1, 2, and 3 cent stamps. That's a lot of stamps. And the salary they received was by the volume of postage that went through. In other words, how much receipts they received. And you can see that in 1950, it was $2,471. In 51, it was $2,883. That's when it was class 4. Then when it went back to class 3, it went up. When it went back to class 4, it went down. And I put in red the salary. In 1951, $2,883 was the equivalent to $28,833. Now, for this, the postmaster simply canceled mail and sold stamps. I think that's a pretty good salary for an hour or two's work a day. Next slide, please. This page and the next one that we'll put up are from the National Archives in Washington, D.C., the record of appointments of postmasters. This is the entire entry about Gunflint, Minnesota Post Office. It was established, the name was changed, and it was closed. Next, please. This is the one for Gunflint Trail. It was changed. Stapleton was postmaster, Albert Hedstrom, and it was closed. If you went to the National Archives, these are the required postal records. That's it. Next page, please. This is a quite interesting letter. I'm not going to read all of it, but it's a letter from a Mrs. Al Ruth Hedstrom. I believe this is Al Hedstrom's second wife. This would be Cheryl Hedstrom Daly's stepmother. This came from a file Willis Raff had, and you might know Willis for writing Pioneers of the Wilderness. This was in the Cook County Historical Society. Almost all the dates are off by 1 year. But Mrs. Hedstrom says the first postmaster of Gunflint Trail was George Stapleton, a Democrat, who was given the job as a reward for helping to elect Harry Truman to president. And the essence of this entire letter is the politics of it. Here I thought, naive of me perhaps, that this is how things were done by recommendation. The mailman, Don Brazel, stopped and picked up the mail all the way up and down the trail. He picked up mail in Grand Marais, delivered it and picked it up till he got to our house, stopped and had it canceled. Then he delivered and picked up all the way up to the end of the trail, came back to our place, had it canceled again. So he had to stop twice. He didn't like wasting time. So when Mr. Eisenhower, a Republican, was elected president, they thought it more convenient to have the post office at the end of the trail. Don Brazel thought it was a great idea because he'd only have to stop once and he could have lunch. And Senator Thigh thought that was a good idea. So that's what they did. Now, the backstory is we bought the property that held the post office and we weren't going to be postmaster. It had to move somewhere. This entire letter is used with permission of the Cook County Historical Society, and it is in its entirety in my report that I'll give to the museum. I've got a 3-ring binder with every document I have, notes, everything that I've talked about. So if you want to read more, it's all there. Next, please. Now, this is a half of a brochure that was put out by the Gunflint Historic Society in 1986 called Gunflint Trail Historic Sites, and 2 are highlighted here in numbers 7 and 8, the original Gunflint Trail and the Gunflint Trail Post Office. This was the 50th anniversary of the Gunflint Trail Gunflint Trail Association, and this keeps cropping up. I just found some more copies of this. People stop once in a while with one of these or a copy of a copy of a copy. Can you tell me where the post office is? When I tell them it's at our house, right here. No, they want to know where's the post office, not your home. So I've included this in here since it simply tells a little bit more about postal history. Next, please. This is an article that was in Northern Wilds in December of 2014. Now, you remember I said I had given Dad mail in 2013. My dad aged quickly. In 2018, he passed away. 2014, not 18, 2014. Joe Frederick came up and did this article, took some pictures, took some copies of the mail, some of the mail that we had. There's one in there. It says Leon Thompson. This is a piece of mail that Dan Bauman gave me that he had. Joe put this article in the Northern Wilds with the help of his publisher, Sean. And when he sent it to me, he says, I thought the beer ad was quite appropriate since your dad, Gus, always said I had 1 beer a day with dinner. I received this. I showed it to Dad. Well, I didn't. I sent it to my nephew who was with my father, showed it to Dad. He passed away a day later. And 3 days later, this was Northern Wilds was buried with him. This entire article is again in the binder that will be in Chik-Wauk. I think you'll find it interesting reading. Next slide, please. The next 2 pages are excerpts from Cheryl Hedstrom Daly's father, Albert Hedstrom's memoirs. She presented to the Gunflint Trail Historic Society a couple years ago. She stopped by later that afternoon. It was Monday, August 14th of 2017, and shared 2 pages of her father's memoirs that were about the post office. I think this one is interesting because this is as Albert typed. a couple of resort owners on Gunflint Trail were politically minded. They were both Republicans, wanted to head the Republican Party into 8th District on the trail. One was Bill Foote, who owned Gunflint with his wife, Justine. The other, George Stapleton, who owned Loon Lake. They battled it out. Bill received the position. George turned Democrat, received the position as the head of the Democratic Party. When Truman was elected, George was given the postmaster position on the Gunflint Trail. George had sold Loon Lake Lodge, built a home on a small lake 30 miles up, and he used the front room of his house as the post office. Next slide, please. And this is the one that Al Hedstrom talks about. Don Brazel liked the idea of having the post office at our house. It was the end of the route. He could have lunch with us while he was eating. I, that being Al, could cancel the mail. And when he finished eating, he'd come down, pick up the mail sack, and head back to Grand Marais. At that time, he said Gunflint Trail had a population of our family of 4, Irv Benson, who lived in one of our cabins. There were suburbs such as Chik-Wauk and Archie Kirk's Resort. I think that's interesting that we had suburbs on the Gunflint Trail. Knowing that the post office was entirely useless and created at extra expense to the government, I, Albert Hedstrom, recommended it be closed. The head man in Duluth agreed with me, and the recommendation was sent to Washington, and I was given notice to close the post office there. When it became known around the nation that it was being closed, I received a lot of letters, several letters, asking that the enclosed stamped envelopes be canceled last day of the post office operation. And that's why I included a couple of those. Next slide, please. This is a part of my recent work trying to find out about Gunflint Trail mail carriers. This is probably the least researched so far. Don Brazel, as far as I know, was the first carrier that used a car, vehicle, truck, van, but not an animal. He started after World War II and continued. Nancy Brazel, his daughter, started helping as a substitute and ended up working 20 plus years as the carrier. When she was unable to do it, her son Donovan, grandson of Don, was the mail carrier and did that until the year 2001. So the Brazel family were the only mail carriers from World War II to 2001 that I could find. This is in need of enhancing, I know. So if people have information, I'd be glad to accept it. Now let's go to the next slide. This is one of 3 pieces of paper that I had planned to use at the end of my talk as a handout and as a quiz. So here's your quiz. I hope you've been paying attention. What is the significance of the picture postcard? Well, of course, it's where the first post office was. Now, what are the significance of the 3 cancellations? First day, Gunflint. Last day, Gunflint. First day, Gunflint Trail. And Stapleton's signature as acting postmaster. I'm still looking for an April 9th of 53, last day at our house. Look through those drawers. Maybe you have the secret. Next. Okay, here's the second page of your quiz. What's the significance of this postcard, picture postcard? Well, of course, that's where the post office was moved. I'm still looking for an August 10th first day there. July 20th of 53 is the closest I have to this first day. And here's Al's signature, and the last day, Halloween, October 31st. Did you pass the quiz? I hope so. Well, next page, please. Here's again this summary I'm not going to ask you any questions of it, but these 3 pages are available as a handout. David Coleman was going to bring those to the meeting at Seagull. I'm going to ask Kim or Bonnie or Bill to take them to either Chik-Wauk or to the July meeting. And there's about 60 or 70 copies, so everyone can have one and have some remembrance. Next slide, please. This is my last slide. It's my most interesting picture postcard, and I've collected about 550 postcards. I've spent 8 years doing this. I've never seen a postcard like this from Greenwood Lodge. It's a mounted fish on a board held by someone that's feathered. Why? How? For what reason? I have no idea. I just found it to be the most amazing, interesting, crazy, goofy. I've never seen anything like it. Next. If you want to get a hold of me, you can do it. I'm on the trail right now, but I'll be leaving in a couple days. My email is lwooding@earthlink.net. If you've never corresponded with me, put the words "add me" in the subject line. Otherwise, you're going to go in the spam box and I'll never see it. I'd like to say thank you again. Thank you, Richard, for inviting me. Again, David, thank you for the help. And again, great. Gunflint Trail Historical Society, thank you for all your support. Thank you, miigwech and mahalo. I'd like to open it for questions.
Any questions anybody has? Not seeing any hands going up, Larry, but we'd sure like to give you a big thank you. It was fascinating history and very pertinent history, of course, to the Gunflint Trail. Very well done, by the way. And we like your shirt, too. So, good job. Really good job.
It's a little bit tight. I guess living on the trail has been too good the last week. But it does have
again,
moose.
Larry.
Pardon me?
You're muted if you want to unmute so we can hear you.
Thank you, Larry. That was tremendous.
Am I muted now?
No.
Okay. I have some questions. Again, I'll repeat them. These were ones that were in the presentation, and if there are answers, I'd appreciate getting them. The 2 dates I looked for postcards, April 9th and 10th of 53. Were there addresses of Gunflint Trail or Grand Marais back at this time? How many deliveries were there in a week in the summer? 3, 5, 6? As a star route, there's no requirement. How many pieces of mail were canceled in a week or a month? There were requirements to make an impression book, to mark this down, but there was no requirement to file, summarize, or save this. So these are questions I have that we have no answers for. And since the postmasters were acting postmasters, the requirements of record keeping were very much less than a real postmaster. I really had fun doing this for 8 years. And I know that you thought you were going to get some nuggets of wisdom from me. I asked David to bring some Hershey nuggets so you could all have a nugget.
And we've enjoyed those.
I'd be glad to share this with anyone. There'll be a copy at Chik-Wauk. I'll have a copy here at the cabin. And I have copies of all of this digitized. I have copies of all the postcards so they can in envelopes. And so I hope at some point to donate all of this or nearly all of it to Chik-Wauk. And I think it'll be a great resource.
Larry, there will also be a video of this presentation available on YouTube for your friends and family and anybody that wants to watch it that missed it.
I think that'll be great. And I certainly hope it's available through the Historic Society's new site. I'm going to say thank you, is it Miigwech? And aloha.